Chris,
Heath.
it's the end of days.
Oh man, I'm concerned.
What are we gonna do?
What's going on?
Well, this is foreshadowing the news article that I wanted to address. If you want to get into that now.
That would be breaking with convention, but if that's how you want to run this podcast, I'm not going to stop you.
No, because the last time I did that, I kind of regretted it. So we'll stick to convention.
You mean you regretted it when you talked about the YouTube channel going under with the music remixes?
Silva Gunner, yeah, for those that don't remember. Here, let me... If I'm backpedaling in the first 30 seconds, why don't I do a new intro?
Okay.
I'm going to run it back. Chris.
Heath.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It's not too bad. Not too bad at all.
All right. That's good to hear.
You know, I think our first intro was a lot cooler, but we're going to keep this one, right?
Well, if we're going to...
I think we should just leave all of this in here. I'm sure the listeners appreciate it.
No, I'm running it back every time. Chris.
Heath?
Hey. What do you got to talk about today?
I'm here today to talk about video games with you.
That's right.
On episode 8 of Mobius Tubes.
8.
And I thought maybe we should announce the date from now on just to provide more context. How do you feel about that?
Ah, crap. Well, yeah, that incentivizes me to mix them faster so that they don't sound so archaic on the release.
But at least the listeners will have a greater appreciation for when the recording was being done.
Okay, I can't stop you.
All right, episode 8 of Mobius Tubes is being recorded today, January 26th, 2019. It's one for the history books. Okay, Heath, tell me a little bit about your past week in games and entertainment.
All right. I am happy to report that I did a little backwards compatibility this week and went back to an old faithful Xbox 360 game. It's called Monaco. What's mine is yours. And the reason I went back to a 360 game is in part with the continuation of the I Hate Hotline Miami trilogy. You remember in the previous episode, I run wild with my disdain for that game and how barrier for entry is just way too high. I think I mentioned, well, when I first brought up Hotline Miami, I had my own problems with it. And just to put a capstone on that series, I wanted to play the game that Hotline Miami could have been, which is a 360 game, if you can believe that. Have you ever played Monaco?
I've never heard of this game at all.
Oh, good. Okay, so what it is a top-down action game in which you have to infiltrate the level because there's guards with vision cones, and you yourself have a certain sort of vision cone that you really take advantage of when you look through the window of certain buildings or if you get in the air ducts. Excuse me, I messed up the title. It's what's yours is mine, not what mine is yours. What I love about it so much is just I can do no wrong in that game. Whereas in Hotline Miami, I would plan my thoughts and stand behind a doorway just at the last second so I could take out one guy, but then the next would come and take advantage of the situation. You know, go back and listen to the previous episode if you don't remember my Hotline Miami rant. Monaco, it's at the pace that Hotline Miami should be, meaning that there's sneaking going on, and if you do get detected by the guards, it's not 120 frames per second, make big decisions like your Scarlett Johansson and Lucy. It's sort of quick pace, hurried. You got to make the right decisions, otherwise you're going to end up a skeleton. But it's so thrilling is the word I'm looking for. As much of a jam as the Hotline Miami soundtrack is, this is the gameplay that should have gone with a soundtrack of that caliber. It also has characters and a pretty developed story mode around those characters. Hotline Miami, you put on a flashy mask, your punches are harder. In this game, you can be the lookout who has better vision, or the pickpocket who can get through locked doors faster. And each one of these characters, the pickpocket, the lockout, the cleaner, they all have their own catered story that is, in my opinion, a lot better than the story in Hotline Miami that I will never know unless I look up a Let's Play. So I played a little bit of that. I'm not done with it yet. I'm pretty sure I'll finish it. I'm playing it on like the Xbox, like I said.
The Xbox One through backwards compatibility?
That's right. It works like a charm.
I'm looking at screenshots of the game just because I've never seen it before. The perspective is exactly like Hotline Miami. It's like you're from above looking at a building as if it's a blueprint and guys are walking around. While Hotline Miami is more of like a frenetic action game, would you put this in a different genre? You mentioned a lot of sneaking around. Would you say this is less of an action game, more of a stealth game?
It is more of a stealth game, and it has co-op, which Hotline Miami doesn't. But to say that it is lacking in its frenetic action doesn't do it justice. Another game that I watched during this week was the new Resident Evil game, Resident Evil 2, the remake.
Yeah.
How much of that was on your radar?
Oh, I'm just... A lot of the podcasts I listen to that are video game focused, the hosts are awfully excited, and some of that enthusiasm is spilling over to me, despite the fact that I've never touched a Resident Evil game, so I don't have a very direct connection to it. But should I dip my toes into the Resident Evil franchise, this might be one of the games I reach for.
Okay, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because, hint, hint, it's a Game of the Year contender. You can already tell. You know the gist of the Resident Evil games, right? It's a zombie outbreak, and whereas Left 4 Dead, the zombies run super fast, right? The old Valve game.
Yep.
In this game, the zombies are really slow. It's a lot about ammo conservation and planning your movements.
Yeah.
There's a character in the Resident Evil game called Mr. X, and he is just a big, slow, super soldier that's constantly walking toward you, and you can spend your limited ammo to slow him down, but for the most part, he's just this... You remember the film It Follows, which had like this super tall guy that only the protagonist could see, and it wouldn't stop, it would slow down. All you could do is outrun it for a limited time.
Yeah, that's
basically what Mr. X is. And
so he's like a ticking timer that puts pressure on the player.
Pretty much. At a certain point in the game, the zombies are not the primary obstacle. The zombies are really just there to slow you down in time for Mr. X to give you just like a cyclone punch. He's such a huge dude, and he doesn't stop. And I was watching a live stream on the day that Resident Evil was released, and I was just so anxious whenever Mr. X would get close to the player. And I feel that same anxiety when I sneak past a guard in this game, Monaco. The point I'm trying to make is it has the thrilling aspect that I assume a skilled Hotline Miami player would feel had they invested 1,000 hours into that busted game. But I'm not going to have that opportunity, so I will easily take Monaco over both of the Hotline Miami games. This game doesn't have a sequel because it doesn't need it. One and done. That's all I have to say.
Awesome. So a game you would recommend potential listeners go back to, maybe check out if how you described it has piqued their interest?
Yeah. I mean, this game, I think I bought this around the same time that I bought Metal Gear Ground Zeroes. Remember that demo for Metal Gear 5?
That's right.
I got a kick out of that game, and I also got a kick out of this game for different reasons. But yes, from what I've said, you can get a pretty solid recommendation from me.
And that was Monaco, What's Yours is Mine, available on Steam as well as the Xbox 360/Xbox One thanks to backwards compatibility.
Also,
good.
check out Resident Evil 2.
Yes, the reviews are stellar. Certainly that will be well worth your time if you enjoy survival horror games. Speaking of survival horror games, let's get our weekly update on Into the Breach because
Oh yeah.
that game, I barely survive every time, and I'm in a constant state of horror. So it's basically the latest Resident Evil game. This will be my third week in a row talking about Into the Breach, so I'll keep it brief. I just finished my third run through the game. It was another success, but this was like my hairiest one yet. Playing it back on normal this time. I was pretty confident with my abilities after winning it twice in a row, so I went with one of the more advanced mech squads available. I just kind of skipped ahead. You can unlock them in any order you want thanks to gaining currency by unlocking achievements, which you then spend on these mech squads. So I went for one of the complex top tier ones. And these guys were all about, they have a passive ability where anytime you make the bugs attack one another, they actually do bonus damage. So it's highly incentivizing you to reposition the bugs to do the dirty work for you, not necessarily kill them with your mechs, but get the bugs to kill each other. And this is reflected in your mech's stats. They don't have a whole lot of raw damage output. Like 2 of your 3 mechs do 1 damage each, and the third guy doesn't do any damage whatsoever. But to make up for this fact, they've got a whole bunch of movement manipulation abilities. And what I mean by that is they can really reposition the bugs more so than any previous squad I played with. And this was, getting the bugs to kill one another is something that I might do naturally like 5 times over the course of an entire playthrough. So not very frequently. And it is not a playstyle that caters to me personally. I had a lot of trouble lining up the kills and using this mech squad as they're intended to. So not one that clicked with me super well, but they're fun to play with. Like, for variety's sake, I'm glad they're in there. I'm sure they could appeal to a lot of players, and that's what I'm saying. I expressed a similar sentiment last week, how just changing up your Into the Breach squad makes it an entirely different game, and these guys definitely were in line with that same feeling I had earlier.
Is this just a class of like the psychic type of pilots, or is this like a designated mind control dude?
It's the mechs the pilots are piloting that have these new abilities.
Okay.
And you mentioned the pilot. The Into the Breach storyline is very bare bones. Like, your various pilots, they make like a couple short quips every once in a while. They're usually amusing, but they're not fully fleshed out characters. But there's a little amusing ways they play with like the lore. For example, I mentioned earlier, the persistent element between runs and Into the Breach is you get to bring one surviving pilot from your previous game into your next game.
Right.
So presumably you pick like a high-level pilot who has gained lots of experience. And there's named pilots in the game. Certain guys who, they're not completely procedurally generated. They have like a name and a face attached to them. And one of these guys, who was in my first playthrough, his quirk was like, his ability is he lets me do 2 turn resets every match instead of just 1 turn reset. So I can make more mistakes with him. And his personality wise, he has kind of like a stutter, and he'd be like nervously exclaiming when things go wrong during a game, and he always stammered and repeated himself a bit.
That's quirky.
But then when he was my choice to bring him into my future game, and like, it's funny, they recognize this fact. He makes the comment right after you start your new game, this time travel, it's fixed my voice. I'm no longer stammering. So it got rid of his stammer.
Oh, weird.
which is a cool little detail to include in a game like this.
Did he turn into like a suave, like perfect confidence super soldier?
Not so much. He's basically a normal guy, but
I wanted him to be. Do you remember in Fallout 4 the radio host has so bad stage fright that he keeps botching like the song names until you complete the quest that gives him like the confidence to go on the air, and he turns into this like smooth talking like, the vault dweller helped me live my life and I owe him a great debt. On to the tunes. And you're like, yeah, because now the rest of the game you don't have to deal with like the this song goes out to boy, you know. Did you ever play Fallout 4?
I haven't, but that sounds like an awesome quest and very, very apt to bring it up.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Shall I continue, or do you want to take the reins for a second?
No, you got more games than I do.
Okay. In this next segment I'm about to introduce for the first time on Mobius Tubes, I call it Rapid Impressions, because I played a whole bunch of games, but none of them for long enough to have a more detailed conversation.
I hope they're like
and
Neopets, Lego Star Wars, and then like a sport, like field hockey.
Actually, it was polo that I was playing.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Anyway, nothing was super speaking to me this past week, so I fluttered around between different games, none of which really got their hooks in me. I'll start with what is probably what most listeners are expecting. I talked about how I just started Prey on the last episode.
Gosh, dude, I already forgot what that game is.
Prey, the sci-fi immersive sim alien hunting game where you are more or less this engineer kind of guy, developed by Arcane Studios, the makers of Dishonored.
What does it look like?
It's a first-person perspective. Gives me a lot of BioShock vibes. There's good things in this game for sure. You know how you like crawl through an environment, picking up all sorts of garbage that isn't really useful, but it's clogging up your inventory?
Yeah.
Prey remedies this because up in your personal office, you have a recycling machine where you can dump all the garbage you find, like frayed wire and tin cans, throw it in there. It compresses it down into like 3 different types of fundamental resources, which you can then use to fabricate useful items in your big, massive, fancy 3D printer. So everything has a bit of value to pick up, which is appreciated.
Once again, Fallout 4, freaking every time I would come across a typewriter, I would be like, oh boy, I got another spring, because springs were rare in the game that I played. And that was the only way you could build this certain receiver of the pipe weapons. You couldn't build the upgrade unless you had a certain number of adhesives or circuitry. You know, same thing. Every time I found a microscope in one of the lab dungeons, I would be like, sick, now this game's gonna get a lot easier.
Right. So Prey and Fallout 4, 2 games that introduce crafting as a solution to like making all the different items in the world valuable. It's a good design choice, I think. Last couple things on Prey. It has a really innovative weapon in it called the glue gun, which if you fire it at an enemy, unsurprisingly, it's going to like slow them down, kind of impede them. But you can just use it in any place in the environment to like build a 3D structure in any shape you desire. You can build a staircase out of thin air, and this really lends itself to allowing you to explore places that you just can't get to in many other games. And it's just that I haven't played it long enough to start thinking in the context of I can build any kind of structure I want, anywhere I want. So I'm not utilizing it to its full potential just yet. I'm sure I'm going to really appreciate the glue gun mechanic more once I become more proficient with it.
Is it like the gels in Portal 2, in which, you know, you use the blue gel to make you jump, or like the orange gel to make you move faster, but this is just like a physical. Does it achieve the same verticality?
Whatever structure you build with the glue gun will hold its shape, so you can make like a 3-dimensional object and then hop on top of it.
Okay.
Or a staircase and climb up it to get to a previously inaccessible zone. Things like that.
Cool.
What is I'm slowly getting into Prey, and the difficulty is what is pushing back against me. Man, these aliens are tough. It might be kind of one of those games where once you build up your character a bit more, you get to progress faster, and initial challenges become easier. I'm in the stage where my character's a scrub. Anything that poses a slight challenge will just like lop off 60% of my health.
Tell me more mimic shenanigans.
Yeah, mimics are, I think I summed up my thoughts on the previous episode. They're cool. They add tension to exploration. That's all I have to say about Prey 2017 for now. Next rapid impression is Hollow Knight.
Yay!
Which is an indie darling, a Metroidvania. You're a little bug kind of exploring this very melancholy world, side-scrolling, platforming, some melee combat elements. It got a lot of popularity when it released in 2018 on the Switch, but it was already out in early 2017 on like PC and other platforms, I believe. I initially started playing Hollow Knight last year, 2017, just because I think I got it in a Humble Bundle, and I had heard so many good things, and there are lots of great aspects about this game to appreciate. Like the lovingly crafted visuals, they almost look hand-drawn. The super consistent tone across this world. It's the somber melancholy that there's like a bit of optimism, a tinge of optimism in there, but it's a sad world to explore. Your character's cute and endearing. The many different bug enemies you encounter are all fun and creative and varied. Unlike most Metroidvanias where you're like, oh, I'm filling out this map as I progress, it's a little more complicated in Hollow Knight. You actually have to visit a new area and then find like a safe haven or a bench to like chronicle the new area you discovered on your map before you actually can view it on the map.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Because if you die and you didn't get to a bench, you lose the knowledge of the map, right?
I think that is the case.
Yeah, I like that.
It's definitely not Dark Souls, but it borrows a couple elements from Dark Souls. The death mechanic where you acquire currency. If you die, you're going to lose all of your currency unless you can make it back to your corpse and recollect it without dying during that process. That borrows heavily from Dark Souls, retrieving souls or blood echoes if we're talking Bloodborne. It also kind of borrows from Dark Souls storytelling philosophy, how it's very vague, and if you want to uncover what's going on, you have to do some digging. I understand how people appreciate that kind of storytelling. It's not really for me. I like more traditionally told, explicit stories. This is a little bit too obscure for my taste.
Well, there is text in this game, no dialogue, but...
Right, there's text, things are told to you, but a lot of the text, you can tell there's like this deeper meaning that they don't come out and inform you about. Presumably you'll find out more later, but I haven't gotten that far, and I'm not sure that I will because this is a game that isn't afraid to challenge you with difficult platforming segments, and that is just a muscle I have not developed. It's probably going to be insurmountable for me. I don't get a big kick out of platforming, especially platforming that makes me bash my head against the wall.
Dude, yeah, I do not fault you for that. Me neither. To the people who have the dedication to endure the what's it called, the path of pain in this game?
Yeah, I don't know what the late game stuff is called. You know more than I.
I watched, there is a segment of this game in which every surface will kill you. So you have to like perfect parry enemies and utilize very specific dashes in order to progress through this just lethal dungeon. I am so amazed by the people who have the dedication to master this movement, whether it's in a platformer like we said, or a shmup. The shoot 'em up games where it's just bullet hell and you're constantly having to memorize shooting patterns. It baffles me.
Same here. Yeah, so Hollow Knight, very clean, simple mechanics to it with jumping, dashing, and slashing with your nail. Because you're a bug, your sword is like a little nail.
Yeah, the themes of this game are really cute. There's like a dung beetle who's pretty funny.
He's the fast travel system, right?
Well, that guy's like a cricket or something. But there is like a proper like poop knight, to be frank.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think I've made it that far. I beat 2 to 3 of the first bosses. They were well designed and fun and fair. But alas, I don't think I'm going to be able to dive any deeper. Which brings us to my final rapid impression. So nothing was really grabbing me this past week. Nothing was getting its hooks in me, so I thought maybe I should consult Heath's flowchart on how to get your friends to play video games using Bandersnatch.
What is this throwback?
Maybe that could come up with a recommendation for me. I'm referencing episode 5. Heath made this awesome flowchart. And looking at the flowchart, I thought to myself...
Did you play Witcher 3 again?
Unfortunately, no. I thought to myself, I really liked how my progress carried over after death during Bandersnatch.
Oh!
Maybe I should give this Minit game a try.
Yay!
And Minit is spelled M-I-N-I-T, but it's a play on the actual unit of time, minute, because after every 60 seconds, your character will die and go back to his starting point. It's a very short game. The one resource I use, howlongtobeat.com, gives me pretty accurate measurements on how long games are. This is clocking in like 90 minutes, and I think my playtime just crossed 90 minutes, and I feel like I'm close to the end, but I have not quite finished it. Just so listeners can have a better visualization of what this game looks like, think about the perspective Zelda: A Link to the Past takes, and make it all black and white. It borrows the aesthetics of like an adventure game with some action elements, but in reality, because of that very short time limit that is imposed on you, it's really more of a puzzle game.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Because every 60 seconds, you're going to try to accomplish something that gets you closer to your goal, and you might not be sure what that is exactly. The very first thing you pick up is a sword, and now that lets you access new areas because you can break some small barriers. And it's all about exploring this environment, finding in kind of a Metroidvania-esque way, you find new tools that help you progress further, access new areas that you could not before. There's a bunch of quirky, fun characters in here that they all have text bubbles. Some of them kind of troll you because you're alive for 60 seconds. You approach a guy.
Yeah, like the beginning of their dialogue is, let me tell you about the time, a long time ago, I was in a log cabin. And then at the very last sentence is like, oh, by the way, press A to run.
Exactly. They don't say anything of consequence for the first 2/3 of their rambling. But you have to wait there for them to finish, and then you'll die at the very end.
I get a kick out of it.
Cool soundtrack. It's not on the level of, say, a Undertale or Deltarune, but I'm digging it. It's upbeat. It's cheery. It eases any frustrations I have during like a bad 60 seconds that I waste. And speaking of that 60-second timer, it adds tension to any of the more mundane things you're doing because you're constantly on the clock. You're like constantly engaged. And I think that's a strength to the game. The puzzles, I don't feel any have been unfair. They make sense for the most part. If you get a key to the lighthouse, you know where to go. You know what that's going to do. You get cool abilities. Eventually, you can swim around, and that opens up all sorts of new possibilities for you. I'm liking Minit as a palate cleanser. Don't expect it to be your next 100-hour RPG session game. It's a game you can knock out in a single day relatively easily.
But it's funny to see like how similarly I play the 100-hour RPG games to how I would play Minit, because you ever play Skyrim more than once?
Yeah.
You just do a beeline from whatever quest exit to what's it called? Whiterun is the center of the map.
I think so.
And people and like side quests will be lining the road, but you'll be taking this dead beeline right through the trees and past them just so you can make up time and get to the middle of the game that you're more interested in. Same thing with Minute. I find that very naturally you're going to be cutting corners really tight and just like look at that pace, running your lines dead on so you can get to the certain progression. You know what I'm trying to say?
I think so. And one cool thing, as you do more runs and continue playing, yes, you're unlocking new items that are helpful, but you're also leveling up your mind, because what helps you make progress in this game is to do things more quickly. And as you develop a more complete understanding of what the map's layout is and where shortcuts exist, you just become a better and faster player just through your own experience. And that's fun as well.
Gotcha.
And that's everything I played in the past week, Heath.
All right, that takes us into the news. Chris, the world is ending.
Yeah, wow. I have not been informed about this.
Well, I will let you know that another YouTube channel that I adored at one time has gone dark. They've pulled their videos, made them private due to a recent acquisition. This might be a little more well-known than the Silva Gunner channel. I'm talking about Machinima. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, they're a big multi-channel network. Is that what they're called?
That's right, an MCN, yes. So Machinima, I think it was like 12 million subscribers at the time that they pulled their videos. This is all due to a recent purchase of the company, and I don't know like what legal things they're trying to figure out. But currently, their whole channel is nothing but like these gray thumbnails of privated videos.
Wow.
Made by hundreds of creators who basically just had their work snuffed out. Some people with notice, but for the most part, just surprise. So no telling when the Machinima's coming back. Currently, the logo is like this sickly green font that no one is a fan of, because you know the Machinima M, right? It's like burned into my brain.
Iconic, yeah.
So who knows? I was going to go through the channel and find like my favorite videos, but in its current state, that's impossible. So I think I would just name drop a couple of my favorite Machinima videos in case there are re-uploads, certainly. There's the Inside Gaming series. They were a group that later joined Rooster Teeth, the other video folks. They made Red vs. Blue, which is also a Machinima, but I didn't care for it. Inside Gaming, what they would play is they would do Steam Roulette, which is just a random generator of Steam games, and sort of find diamonds in the rough, if you will, of like the crappy catalog that Steam can be.
Got it, yeah.
That series would later turn into a show called Demo Disc, in which they take CD-ROMs with video game demos and play through those and just riff on them. And they found some gems, let me tell you. They found a game called Chaser, and they personify these jank characters and totally make fun of some broken gameplay. Inside Gaming has endured this long. In their current state, they're called Funhouse. The catalog that was on the Machinima channel is well worth reviving now that it's dead. Other shout-outs are The Two Best Friends Play, videos that were on Machinima because that's where they got their start. Although many of them have been re-uploaded on their main channel. One I really want to mention that's on the Machinima is the Man vs. Wild game. You know, Bear Grylls, the show Man vs. Wild.
I've heard of it, yeah.
There's a game version in which Bear Grylls he's hunting beavers and he's fighting crocodiles. It's clearly a more exciting version of the show, but it's the most fun to be had is when Pat and Matt would fail the prompts or get covered in bees and try to start a fire while being attacked by a moose. And that video is so old compared to their new stuff, but it has withstood the test of time, just like Inside Gaming. Another video that I don't think is on Machinima, but is considered, you know what Machinima is, right?
More or less, yeah.
In its classical definition, Machinima is media created using video game assets in engine. So most often you would see Halo characters
red versus
nodding
blue.
their heads. Yes, that's the most fundamental definition of Machinima, giving voices to these video game characters and telling a story with video games. So I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite pieces of Machinima, not necessarily the channel, Gears of Halo Theft Auto 5. Did you ever watch this video?
No.
Just judging by the title, you already know what it is. It's this perfect amalgamation game that was advertised as being like this highly profane, you know, the next installment of the Grand Theft Auto series with all the action from Halo and Gears of War. They treated it like a Christmas special because you can hear like a sleigh ride music in the background. And this narrator would be telling this innocent kid, played by the other Halo guy, like the yellow Halo man, telling him all about the things that you can get up to in Gears of Halo Theft Auto 5. And it's very much, you know, kid humor, like, oh, you can blow up the bank with a space laser while you punch the prostitute, and they make jokes about like Spider-Man 3 and how like nothing is worse than Spider-Man 3. I'm spoiling much of it, but in the death of Machinima during the wake, I hope that Gears of Halo Theft Auto 5 and 6, they made a sequel, are playing in the lobby. So that's the news that has everyone looking toward their favorite YouTube content and holding it closely because you don't know what's going next.
Right. Surely if Machinima can fall, no one is completely safe.
Yeah. Did you have a news?
Yeah. I don't think I have as much to say about this as you did on Machinima. But we got a pretty surprising update on the development of Metroid Prime 4 last week.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's... What do you think that sound effect was? I blew the slate clean.
Got it.
Gotta dust off this development cycle.
Yeah, so suffice to say, Nintendo has delayed Metroid Prime 4.
Why?
And the developer who has been working on it thus far, gosh, do you know who that was?
I know who they're going with now. It's like Retro Gaming.
Yeah, Retro Games will be taking the helm, and I think Retro are responsible for creating the first 3 Metroid Prime games. I might be wrong about that. So they seem like the appropriate choice. I'm trying to look up who was taking the helm previously.
Who dropped the ball?
Yeah, who messed up? It's like they've been wiped off the face of the earth. I can't find it.
It's the Machinima of games studios.
So they're completely restarting development with Retro taking the helm, and this foreseeably pushes back its release years.
That's fine with me.
To be honest, I was not able to find which studio had been developing it. But when I first saw the announcement of who was creating Metroid Prime 4, I was kind of surprised that it was them. But you can cut all this out. I don't have the actual name.
Okay.
So a short news story with that. Do you have any more news, Heath?
I do. I have one to finish this section off. I got really excited before recording this because I was ready to talk about Fallout 76 going free to play, because we mentioned in our first episode talking about purchasing practices of video games and the depreciation. And
yeah, that was episode 2.
Episode 2, right. So if Fallout 76 were to go free to play, that would most definitely be a record for a game going from 60 to 0 in that short amount of time. But unfortunately, Bethesda announced that they reported that they're not going free to play. The rumor was started because of EB Games Australia, which is just a foreign GameStop. They removed all copies of the game from their online store, but that was simply an error brought on by the game being a part of like a buy one, get one free deal. So the game is currently, $40 to $50, depending. And it seems like it's going to stay there. I was just so excited for the follow-up of the episode 2 discussion and be like, oh man, now no one's going to buy a Bethesda game because they know as soon as the reviews tank, they're going to make it free to play in 6 months. But apparently that's not going to be the case. Bethesda is too busy just coming out with more poor quality merch. Have you heard about the leather jacket?
This is different than the canvas bag, right?
Yeah, this is the canvas bag has evolved into another news story called the leather jacket. There is currently a Fallout 76 custom apparel that is $276 is what I read, and the internet is just memeing it into oblivion. You know how the Vault suits color scheme is blue and yellow, or like a blue and like a gold. What people are doing is they're photoshopping like cheap blue plastic raincoat poncho things and drawing like a 76 on the front in like a yellow marker, and then people are taking like tarps and saying like it's made of high quality leather, but it's like a JPEG of a tarp, and they're taking like blue plastic bags and embroidering 76 on the front, just taking Bethesda to town because the canvas bag was a disaster. The rum was a disaster. Did we talk about that last?
I don't know.
How they partnered with like an alcohol distributor to make like Nuka-Cola dark rum. And as it was advertised, it would come in like this dark bottle. But all they did was take like a regular bottle of like a glass bottle of rum and encase like this weird plasticky thing around it. And in case you're like, well, Heath, that's not a huge deal if it's just an ugly bottle, but it's still like custom made. I could see myself paying, I forget how much it is. I bet it's like $50. But if you thought that wasn't so bad, they manufactured it so like this like plastic Nuka-Cola casing around this bottle is flush. You ever pour a liquid out of a glass and it like runs down the side of the glass and like shoots back towards your hand?
I can't say that I have.
Oh, okay. Then 90% of the people listening to this totally have. That's the case with how they designed this bottle. As you try to pour the alcohol into a glass, it's going to do is run down the side of the bottle because the lip of the glass is flush to the plastic that they encases it. So it's going to do is like pour out onto the table because Bethesda can't do anything right anymore. And all we got to do now is wait for 76 to go free to play. If not next month, like there's no telling. I was so excited for this week.
You know how I just said I can't say that I have? when you asked me a question.
Did you misspeak?
I was looking for this article I wanted to talk about. I have no idea what you asked me about, just for clarity.
Well, I can totally tell you. If you've ever tried to like pour something and you kind of hesitate and the liquid just spills over the edge of the, it's not usually the case with like a gallon of something, but sometimes if you pour and you hesitate and then you try to pour again, there's already like a trail of the liquid that's running down the container. So when you try to pour it again, it'll just follow the flow that's already on the edge of the container and not end up in the target glass. It'll just run down the side of your hand onto the table. This is a universal issue with some poorly designed bottles. And according to the folks who dropped the big cash on the Fallout Rum Special Edition, they're running into this problem. And it's just a laugh a minute. Next week, I'm certain we're going to have another joke about how this leather jacket is made of asbestos.
Excellent.
Here's hoping.
So while I was ignoring everything Heath was talking about, I was finding a news story that I know Heath is going to love because we've already talked about it to death on this podcast, and he can't get enough of it. But apparently, Heath and I are not the only two people drawing comparisons between the size of the video game industry and the size of the other entertainment industries, such as movies, because apparently the numbers just came in for 2018 gross revenue generated by video games in the U.S. and globally as well.
Didn't we already do this? It was like 29 billion?
Yeah, I did not have the 2018 numbers yet. I was pulling from 2017, I want to say.
Okay, so if we try to imagine what the sales are going to do to that previous figure, it's probably low 30s now.
It turns out Heath is too conservative with his guess because it was a banner year, apparently, and everyone's writing about it. I'm taking these numbers specifically from a website called HollywoodReporter.com. They wrote an article. In 2018, just in the U.S. alone, gross software, this is according to the Entertainment Software Association, the ESA, and the NPD Group, video games generated $43.4 billion.
Wow.
Which is up 18% from the previous year. So they're getting bigger and bigger. And here's a fun statistic that I didn't see anywhere else. I'm often wonder, like, how much do free-to-play games actually make off of microtransactions and in-game purchases? And they actually cite how much money Fortnite made last year, which obviously contributes to this figure. Fortnite alone,
probably,
take a guess.
Probably like 400 million.
Well,
that's too much. Sorry, your previous figure got me so inflated. Just the one game.
Wait a second. All right, I misspoke. Actually, the total number in the year is 43.4 billion.
Right.
And you were guessing 400 million for Fortnite.
Yeah, just Fortnite.
Fortnite apparently is responsible for $2.4 billion.
Wow, that's so much money.
Let's do a quick division.
Oh, I was off by.
So apparently, Fortnite itself accounts for 5.5% of video game revenue in the past year.
I believe it. Yeah, I can see that. It was the most downloaded, probably.
So, takeaway is games are big. Should we move on?
Oh man, I mean, we could go on about how I imagine that what was the previous stat was that games were at 28 billion and movies were at like 20.
I only have box office numbers for 2018. The box office did 11.9 billion, so about 12 billion.
That's crazy. Why?
And when I look at all these articles, there's a whole bunch of them. They're all kind of like copy and paste saying the same thing. And I go down into the comments. I see a lot of commenters going through the same kind of mental gymnastics that I went through, some people take the stance that this is not surprising, and they cite things like video games are more expensive. They have these new microtransactions and additional ways to monetize. So of course they're getting more money than movies. And then you have the people on the other side going, no, this is surprising. Video games are the more niche market, and yet they're way outperforming this more ubiquitous entertainment product. Isn't that worth talking about? Isn't that a weird thing to have happen? So, and then they debate back and forth, like between how niche are video games exactly, and I guess that's a question that has some nuance to answering.
It definitely causes your confidence to go out the window, especially when, like, I'm trying to think now, how much do like books make? Books can't be nearly as much as movies, right?
I would think so. During the same article, they mentioned how big the music industry is, and these are all specific to the U.S. by the way, not global.
I want to say it's like 30 billion.
Apparently, the music industry revenue in the U.S. For the first half of 2018 came to 4.6 billion.
Wow, I was giving it way too much credit.
Apparently, they just cited the first half because year-end numbers are not yet released, but I guess double it to get a ballpark estimate.
Yeah, so games just blow movies and music out the water. We need something else to compare it to. Like, how much do sports make?
I think that would be a pretty big number.
Sports has to be in the it's got to be more than like 50 billion to compete with games. How much do cars make? We got to compare video games to like the most lavish forms of entertainment.
Yeah.
How much is gambling?
Right. Maybe I'll come back next week with some of these numbers.
Oh, I'm super interested in this now, even more so, because I'm just so curious to think, like, I made the joke in, I know that Adam Sandler movies have grossed $2 billion, and it's just really fun to think about how many Adam Sandlers equal how many Fortnites, and
right.
What I said earlier, I want to know what sport games have to compete with. This is just like the progression of, you know how PewDiePie surpassed the YouTube gaming channel for most subscribers, so he is like the undisputed #1 gaming channel. I want to know how undisputed video games as a whole are compared to do like amusement parks pull in billions and billions? If you were to add all those together, like how do video games compare to like the hotel industry? Where are we lining up? Like money has no grounding anymore. I'm at a loss for fiscal responsibility.
I feel like we should look up whatever the world's biggest industry is. Look at that number just to gain some context here.
I'm pretty sure it's cars or sports.
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that wraps up the news, correct?
Yes. And
unfortunately this week, we don't have any listener emails we can dip into. So we can ask each other reflective questions. How does that sound?
That sounds fine.
Did you happen to bring anything you want to discuss this week after last week's why are Japanese games so weird, and what was your other question? Or did you might have only had one.
That was the one, and then we went into all the listener emails. I will say Resident Evil 2, the one that just released, although it's a Japanese game, it doesn't feel Japanese. I mean, it takes place in Montreal. That's a whole story on its own. But I totally look to Resident Evil and wonder, Why can't Metal Gear be more like that? Why can't Persona be more like that? It's still like a Japanese game, and they have such attention to detail, but not have like the weird. No one in Resident Evil is doing like quirky Sugoi anime tropes.
To be fair, I think there is some ridiculousness in Resident Evil, but like I said earlier, I haven't played any of them, so I could be talking out of my butt here.
We'll see. I totally intend to keep watching these live streams of the game.
So I'll have to provide us with a question to give the listeners a peek behind the curtain here. I have this notes file on my phone where I jot down potential podcast conversation topics whenever they pop into my head. I have a few topics we could talk about. I'm going to give you a sneak peek without revealing what the entire question is. Multiple choice, and you're going to decide which one we go into. How does that sound?
Sure.
I have a grand total of 2 options for you. One deals with the economics around video games and some predictions we might make.
Okay.
And the other deals with certain design philosophies that different developers employ and which ones we think are ultimately better.
I dig both of these.
Whichever one we don't get to, I'm sure we'll cover on a future episode.
All right. We already flirted with economics today, so let's try some design philosophies.
Okay. Here's my question. How would you prefer game developers balance their developer intent when making a game versus giving the player more freedom, more options, more ways to experience it? And I'll provide a little context for you here. This question is inspired by a video made by Mark Brown on YouTube. It's called Game Maker's Toolkit. And this particular video, I believe its title is Should Dark Souls Have an Easy Mode? And the crux of his argument here is that obviously it's well within the developer's rights, the people who make video games. They're totally entitled to make the game as they see fit, to present an experience that they want to make. We as consumers, we don't get to force them to make exactly what we want. It's up to them to decide, and then they face whatever economic consequences are the fallout of their decision. And one thing about Dark Souls, a very popular franchise from Software, is that it does not have different difficulty settings. When you boot up a game of Dark Souls, you're playing it and it's the same level of difficulty no matter what. And presumably this is because the fine folks at From Software, they have a vision of what they want to make, and if they put in easy mode, it's kind of compromising what they intend for you to be experiencing when you play a game of Dark Souls. It's not intended to be a cakewalk. It adheres to their mantra, which is difficult but fair. You're going to encounter lots of obstacles, lots of challenges, and part of the experience inherent to the Dark Souls experience is that struggle that you overcome.
Getting wrecked.
However, yeah, get good, as the players say. But let's look at the consumer for a second and their perspective. There's a whole lot of things in the Dark Souls series that you can appreciate that are removed from its inherent difficulty. It has very cool, unique enemy designs that feel like living beings when you encounter them. Full of variety. There's the labyrinthian level design that snakes and branches, and you open shortcuts, and there's a very rewarding sense of discovery and exploration in it. It has awesome architecture. I'm mainly speaking to Bloodborne here, because that's the only From Software game I've played. But it's ornate and gothic, and It evokes like Victorian England, and there's so many cool parts to this game other than just how hard the combat is. And unfortunately, if you're John Doe just trying to play the game, and unfortunately your level of skill is not quite over the threshold that Bloodborne or Dark Souls requires of you, and you don't want to put in the time and effort to cross that threshold, unfortunately you're locked out of all these cool elements in the game that you just don't get to experience because that's not the intention From Software had when making it. But if there had been an easy mode or a casual mode, then you could sidestep that difficulty and still find a way to appreciate and enjoy all the game has to offer. And that was my main example. Another example that pops into my mind is Celeste from last year, a very tricky platforming game that the developers, like one of the game's core themes is overcoming one's struggles, and the game's difficulty is meant to reflect that. However, unlike Bloodborne, Celeste incorporated what they call assist mode, which is a very detailed, I think you access it from the options menu, where you can change all sorts of parameters to very finely tune the difficulty as you see fit. Whether it's like slowing down your movement speed so you don't need to have as fast of reflexes, or giving yourself like multiple jumps in the air so you can cover more distance. It gives you very like granular details that you can change. But when you first load up this menu, I believe you're greeted with a message from the developers saying, everyone is welcome to mess around with this assist mode, but we encourage you to play the game as we developed it. It's our intention for it to be played in this particular way using the default settings. With that said, we're not going to stop you from making it easier. So they convey their intent, but give the player freedom as well. And I'm wondering, do you think one approach or the other is more in the wrong here? Should developers be beholden to being more accommodating, allowing more ways for players to play their game? Or should we totally support them in their quest to develop games as they see fit, give us the best experience? They're giving us the experience they think we should play. And it's kind of, I'm rambling at this point. Do you have anything you can jump into this conversation with?
Yeah, so you mentioned like difficulty and stuff. I just want to talk about the most popular games are the ones that allow the greatest amount of freedom for the player. Obviously, Minecraft is not declining in popularity. It is still the online powerhouse that it is because of its limitless potential to build whatever you want. And with Minecraft 2 coming out, that's that Hightail game that we watched the trailer for that one time.
Yeah.
That one is just grossly the latter of your question, where it gives the player just so much potential to, like, even using like dev tools, like you said, and watching videos together in the game. The longevity of Minecraft, the popularity of Fortnite is, based on the creativity you can have by the buildables in that game and the functionality of getting verticality on an opponent and just taking advantage of all of the exploits that come with customizable buildings and the crafting. Grand Theft Auto 5, that's sort of a mix between a game that the developers want you to play the way that they intended it to be programmed, the single player. And then there's the reason it's still super popular, in addition, is because everyone's still modding all of these custom multiplayer modes in which you are driving through loop-de-loops and flying helicopters through like impossible structures just because somebody thought of like a fun game mode that would involve that level of creativity. So the fact that you can't scroll through obviously certain games on the most popular list, like CSGO and League of Legends, they don't really have that level of player freedom like you were talking about. But the fact that so many of these most popular games, like Gary's Mod is like 13. That's nothing but run amok. It's a physics sandbox. You can do whatever you want in it. Rust, you can just go crazy. We didn't really cater any experience for you. Just craft your way for hours on hours. The question is, where do I stand on the balance between catered experience and freedom for player creativity? Do you want to reiterate what it was again?
You nailed it. Yeah. What development methodology do you think developers should subscribe to? Presenting a very finely tuned experience that they think is ultimately the best, or taking all the chains off, letting players decide for themselves exactly what kind of experience they want to get out of a game?
Well, the most egregious recent objection toward developers specifically designing an experience and sort of carving out how the player should experience the game, just make sure that the player has the option to say no. Obviously, if it's a super mainline quest and it's the mission right before like the final boss, and it's like, oh, we have to stay and fight, and your character's dialogue options are like yes, yes, and yes, that's obviously gonna blue ball any player creativity that could have happened in that option had you had the freedom to like abandon your party members, even though that's not like the most cinematic option available. That one example is just indicative of how come I can't do whatever I want in this certain circumstance. Oh, it's because the developers spent 60 hours modeling this one enemy type, and you got to be able to see it. Otherwise, why spend all this development time? At the cost of missing out, developers need to realize, like, hey, on someone's 5th playthrough, they're going to want to abandon the love interest at the most important moment, and we got to make sure that we have something there to carry the story forward. You know what I'm trying to say? How like the most frustrating thing a game developer can do is keep your protagonist on rails toward a certain branch in the story. The more linear a game is developed, the less forgiving it is for folks who are so used to the limitless creativity of other games.
I think Rockstar is a bit guilty of that. How you have to tackle missions in Red Dead Redemption 2 in a very specific manner, and deviating from their plan usually results in a failed mission.
Yeah. I'm trying to come up with another example other than the one that I mentioned way back.
From the Nakey Jakey video, right?
Yep.
You made me a fan of his. I watched a whole bunch of his videos.
Oh, they're so easy to watch. You just flow into the next.
In conclusion, I respect it to a certain extent when a developer says, no, this is the way you play our game, just because like that's inherently making their product have more niche appeal. It's like limiting how financially successful it could be. And I'm like, wow, they believe in their product so much that they're willing to put up with the financial consequences of having a less mass appealing game. But on the other hand, I have respect for that methodology, but I ultimately side with having more options, just because getting more games into more people's hands who would not otherwise be willing to try them is too much of a good thing, in my opinion. I benefited from an example recently, a game called Soma, which is kind of a horror psychological thriller type game developed by Frictional Games, the makers of Amnesia, The Dark Descent.
That's a good watch.
And And I wasn't going to touch the game. The concept and the story appealed to me, but me and horror do not mix super well. But then, lo and behold, a while after release, they put in this gameplay mode called like safety mode or something. It makes you, the player, invincible. You don't have to put up with like the hiding and avoiding the enemies. You can run right past them and just experience the story and the puzzle elements. And that's exactly how I played the game. And I had a fun time with it. And if they hadn't added that new accessibility feature, I would have skipped right by it completely.
That makes a lot of sense. You're not... I guess you are eliminating the danger, but it like you said, it makes it more accessible. I would prefer that.
And I think we're in agreement there.
Cool.
Very cool. Heath, I have proof that our podcast is touching other people's lives. A mutual friend of ours reached out to me and said he started playing the first Danganronpa game after listening to one of our episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like how you got to vicariously relive the events of Detroit Become Human during our spoiler cast, he's sending me his live impressions as he plays, and I'm vicariously reliving the events of Danganronpa from his playthrough, and I'm enjoying it immensely.
Very cool.
So we're touching lives. Is there anything else you want to discuss on this episode of Mobius Tubes?
I can talk about the games that I want to play in the upcoming week.
Yeah, sneak peek. Hit us with it.
I was considering going back into Crackdown. Remember the Crackdown? Did you ever play it?
Yeah, I did not play it. I know that's the game where you jump on top of buildings to grab orbs. Right.
So, Crackdown 3 is intended to release next month. So I kind of wanted
finally.
I kind of wanted to go into that. I hope it's still intended for next month.
I think it is.
Yeah,
it'll
definitely
release the first half of this year.
Yeah, February 15th. Yeah, so I'm thinking about going back into Crackdown and being like, hey, I had a lot of fun with this one in the first place. I think I'll prep for the threequel.
Nice. A post Valentine's Day treat.
Sure.
I have no idea what I'm going to be playing the next week. My taste has been so hard to nail down recently. So I won't make any predictions about what I'll be playing.
I'm certain some of our fans can give you a certain recommendation at what address.
Yeah, please tell me what I should be playing at the email address mobiustubespodcast@gmail.com. We had a light email week this week, so pick up the slack. Send us all sorts of burning questions.
And let me know what was your favorite machinima video that you remember. Hopefully the channel will be reinstated and it will allow you to go down memory lane. And if you do so, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your question, Chris.
Thank you for your time, Heath. And that's a wrap.